Have you ever stopped to think that sometimes our lives can change completely because of something we don't even imagine exists? Because André Silva, he had everything to be just another ordinary man in this fast-paced world. Hard-working, honest, discreet. The kind of person who walks down the street and no one notices. I lived in a simple neighborhood with houses close to each other, neighbors who knew each other by name, and a routine that was repeated every day. André was married to Luciana, a firm woman, a warrior, a companion at all times. Together they had a young son, who was his greatest pride. Andrew worked in an auto repair shop. It wasn't a dream job. There was no glamour, no easy money, but it was enough to pay the bills, put food on the table and watch her son grow up with dignity. He had no police records. He was never involved in a street fight. It was never in the newspaper. His biggest crime, perhaps, was forgetting to take out the trash on Tuesday or arriving home late after a long job. Life was simple, and he liked it that way. But fate, oh, fate had prepared the worst nightmare for him. Something that no father, no husband, no ordinary man could imagine. Because while André continued his silent routine, working hard, paying the bills, taking care of his family, in some other corner of the city, someone who had the same face as his was choosing a completely opposite path. What André didn't know, and even in his worst thoughts, he couldn't have suspected, was that there was someone exactly like him. The same look, the same smile, the same physical structure, a perfect copy, a twin brother, a secret that had been hidden since the day he was born, a detail of his history that he never knew. But that would be enough to destroy everything he had built with so much effort. And when destiny crossed their path, it wouldn't be by chance. It would be at the worst time, in the worst way, and with the worst consequence that an innocent man could face. And look, if this story has captured you so far, if at any point you felt anger, indignation, or even imagined what you would do in André's place, then I invite you, from the bottom of my heart, to subscribe to this channel and leave a like. Because stories like this need to be told. Not to entertain, but to make the world stop and think. And each like, each subscription is like saying, I'm here, I care, and I want to know where this ends. But it all started on a dawn like any other. The kind where the city seems to sleep in silence, while life continues to hide secrets in the shadows. A few streets away from where André lived with his family, a brutal robbery took place inside a small neighborhood grocery store. A simple place frequented by neighbors, common people. But that night, everything got out of control. Two armed men invaded the place. Despair took over. Customers were surrendered. The grocery store owner tried to react. And that's when the worst happened. A gunshot, screams, running, panic. An innocent man fell to the ground, dead. And do you know what caught the police's attention most about that scene? A security camera outside, positioned right at the exit of the establishment. She recorded everything. And in just a few seconds, a frozen image would completely change the fate of someone innocent. The suspect runs away. The face appears, sharp, of course, impossible to ignore. And when the cops paused that video, they were in shock. It was André's face, or at least it seemed to be. Except you have an important detail here. André, that night, was at home, sleeping next to his wife and young son, far from that tragedy, far from that crime. But from the moment that image fell into the hands of the police, nothing else mattered. Because in the real world, you don't always have to be guilty to pay the highest price in life. That recording became the invisible sentence that already condemned André before he even knew he was being accused. What he didn't imagine was that that night would not only destroy the life of the victim of the crime, but also his own. And the worst was just beginning. There were days of silence. Days when André woke up early, went to work, came back tired, and ended the night watching television next to his wife and rocking his young son to sleep. Not even in his worst nightmares could he imagine what was about to happen. Until, on a morning that should have been as normal, as any other, the most frightening sound echoed through the house. Loud knocking on the door, lots of, urgent, the ones that make your heart freeze before you even get up from your chair. When André opened the door, his world collapsed. Armed police, cold voices, hard looks. André Silva, you're under arrest. Robbery followed by death. Yes, you heard that right. Stuck there at the door of your own home, in front of the woman he loved most, in front of the son who watched everything without understanding anything at all, clinging to his mother's legs with fear in his eyes. André was paralyzed. The floor disappeared. The air disappeared. Me, arrested? Why? I never did anything like that. He tried to explain, tried to speak, tried desperately to be heard. But no one wanted to listen, because for them, the answer was already recorded. An image, a photo, a video lasting just a few seconds that, at that moment, was worth more than any word, any truth, any life, built with honesty. André's wife cried uncontrollably, begging for explanations. The son screamed, wanting his father back, but they handcuffed André as if he were a monster. And the worst, as he was placed inside the cold police car, surrounded by curious neighbors and judgmental gazes, André realized that his biggest enemy wasn't the crime he didn't commit. It was his own face. That face, identical to that of the real criminal, was about to transform into a prison much more painful than any cell. Because when the system believes it has already found the culprit, the truth becomes just a disposable detail. What should have been a process in search of truth became a spectacle based on appearance. At each hearing, André sat in the dock with his eyes downcast and his soul in pieces, while the prosecutor showed, on a huge screen, the same image over and over again, the video of the robber fleeing the scene of the crime, and next to it, a photo of André, taken from his personal documents. Look, carefully. They are identical, they said, as if that ended the trial. It was as if it no longer mattered where he was that night, or whether there were fingerprints, witnesses, any other evidence. One face was enough, a single face to erase a whole life of honesty, of work, of being a present father. The similarity became the only proof. And in court, no one seemed to question it. André had no prior record. He had never been arrested, not even stopped at a traffic stop. He was an ordinary citizen, the kind that no one understands on the street, until he made headlines. But there, before judges and jurors, he was treated as if he had been trained to kill. The prosecution spoke with conviction. He repeated the same words with a theatrical tone. He was there, he was seen, he is the man in the video. They ignored the flaws in the investigation. They ignored the absence of DNA, fingerprints, and eyewitnesses who could confirm anything. They were in a hurry for someone to blame. And André, it was too convenient to be innocent. In silence, he watched his identity being murdered by an image out of context. Because sometimes the biggest crime someone can commit is simply looking like the real person. And when justice chooses to see without investigating, it is the truth that ends up condemned first. André's trial was not just a legal process, it was a sentence against everything he had built in life. It didn't matter if there were no fingerprints at the crime scene. It didn't matter if there was no DNA. There was not even a direct witness who said, "I saw this man commit that crime." But none of that seemed to have any value when the only thing that weighed there was André's face. The conviction seemed to have been written long before the defense opened its mouth. When the judge began to read the sentence, the silence in the courtroom was suffocating. 30 years in prison, 30 years for a crime he didn't even witness, 30 years taken from an innocent man for appearance's sake. His wife broke down in tears. He screamed that this was an injustice, that they were destroying an entire family before everyone's eyes. But who listens to the cry of a woman who fights against the system itself? For the jurors, for the prosecutors, for the newspapers that already printed the headline ready. The story was already resolved. André's son, too young to understand the evil of the world, would grow up believing that his father was a cold criminal convicted of killing an innocent man during a cowardly robbery, a lie planted within your own story. And André was sent away to a distant, cold, forgotten prison, as if the system wanted to not only punish him, but erase him from everyone's memory, from a hard-working family man to a number inside a cell. But what no one imagined was that the true nightmare of this story was still far from over, because the biggest crime committed against André was still hidden. And when that truth came out, it would be so absurd, so unbelievable, that it would explode everything people thought about guilt, justice, and destiny. If this part of the story revolted you as much as it revolted me when I told it, answer me honestly in the comments. Do you believe that the system really cares about the truth, or just the most convenient version? Write down a single word that defines what you felt right now. It could be injustice, impotence, or absurd. Your comment helps keep this story alive and shows that you're not indifferent to the pain of those who have been forgotten. The days turned into months, the months, years, and inside a cold and silent cell, André fought every day not to lose the only thing he had left, hope. Isolated from the world, far from his wife and son, he transformed his suffering into letters. I wrote everything down, every thought, every memory, every dream of a reunion that seemed increasingly distant. He sent letters to his son, telling him stories, trying to be a father from a distance. He sent letters to his wife, swearing his innocence, asking her not to give up on him. But the answers, increasingly rare. Time outside didn't stop. The son grew up, formed opinions, heard comments, watched the news, all saying that his father was a murderer. In André's mind, the biggest pain wasn't the cell, nor the bad food, nor the freezing nights. The greatest pain was imagining the look on his own son's face, full of disappointment, believing a lie. And while the days passed the same, without news, without justice, without a voice, André still repeated to himself, like a mantra that kept him alive, one day, the truth will come out. One day. But with each passing year, that day seemed further away, almost unreachable. Years passed. André was already almost a forgotten ghost within the prison system. Outside, the world went on without him. But destiny sometimes has mysterious ways of acting. In a neighboring city, far away, a new crime shocked the population. A brutal assault, the same coldness, the same way of acting. The victim, once again, a humble, hard-working merchant, cowardly killed in the middle of the night. The images captured by security cameras quickly went viral. The face of the criminal running down the street, fleeing the scene, was on the news. But what no one expected was what was about to happen. When the video reached investigators, the shock was immediate. The face was the same. It was identical. Andrew, the same man who, according to the courts, was already paying for an almost identical crime. But how was that possible? How could someone be imprisoned for years and at the same time appear to be committing another crime on the outside? This doubt began to bother people who, until then, had never believed in his innocence. Because this time, André's alibi was irrefutable. He was inside a maximum security prison, locked, watched, no possibility of leaving. What until then seemed like a fair sentence began to turn into a true mystery. Who was that man in the images? How could he have the same face, the same body, the same appearance? For the first time, after years of silence, suffering, and injustice, a small light of hope was beginning to dawn. A doubt that would change everything, because if that wasn't just a coincidence, if that man really existed, maybe, finally, André's nightmare was about to have an answer. But what no one knew is that this answer would be much bigger, much more absurd, and much more unbelievable than anyone could imagine. What came to light in the following days seemed like a movie script, but it was real life, raw, harsh, and absolutely unimaginable. By following the trail left by the genetic data, the defense team, now with the support of independent experts, discovered old records buried in registry offices in the interior, which pointed to a child registered only by André's biological father. A child born months before the official marriage, the result of a temporary relationship that was never mentioned to the family he would later build. The boy's name was Alex, and what was most surprising was the coincidence, or destiny, that brought these two men together, identical in DNA, separated by life. André grew up in a simple home, surrounded by love, principles, and honest work. Alex, on the other hand, has traveled a crooked path, involved in petty theft since he was a teenager, accumulating police records under false names, always hiding in the shadows. But the most shocking thing of all was realizing that for years, Alex had wandered the streets with André's face, a clean face, a face that society trusted, and he knew it, used this. The revelation caused a profound rupture in André's life. How can you accept that there was someone identical to you, and that this person destroyed your life without ever even meeting you? The pain didn't just come from injustice. It came from the abandonment of the truth, from the betrayal that destiny seemed to have planned even before his birth. No close relative, not his mother, not his uncles, no one knew of Alex's existence. The father, who passed away years ago, took the secret to the grave, and this silence, maintained for so long, cost André almost a decade behind bars. From that moment on, it was no longer just about proving innocence. It was about reclaiming identity, to rebuild what was torn apart. André now knew the name, the face, and the origin of the man who lived as his shadow, and who, even without ever looking into his eyes, had destroyed everything he was. Now I want to hear from you. If it were you, if you suddenly discovered that there was someone in the world with your face, and that person ended your life, what would be the feeling that would dominate your heart? Write a single word here in the comments that defines how you felt listening to this story. It can be revolt, sadness, or even unbelievable. Write it down. I'm going to read them all because this story deserves to be felt together with you. Alex grew up in the shadow of a secret, in a distant city where his name was known only behind the scenes of crime. He never had contact with André, never knew about his brother's existence until he began to realize, between the lines of his own life, that identical face could be more than a coincidence. From a young age, he was involved in small thefts, then bigger crimes, and when he realized that the faces on the news looked like his, something inside Alex changed. He didn't wear disguises. He didn't hide. On the contrary, he exploited every trait shared with André to commit his crimes without arousing suspicion. I knew that if anyone were to be incriminated, it would be the other one, the innocent man with a stable life, who no one imagined had a stunt double out there. It was like having an invisible shield made of genetics. And so, with disturbing coldness, Alex went free, while André languished behind bars. When the police finally located him, it wasn't just the similarity that shocked, it was the contrast between the two. Same appearance, opposite stories. One shaped by daily struggle and the love of family. The other guided by neglect, anger, and survival outside the law. Looking at Alex was like looking at a distorted version of André himself, a version that had never paid for anything. Until now, André got out of prison, but the prison never left him. When the gates opened, the world outside was no longer the same, and neither was he. Almost 10 years had passed, 10 stolen years, 10 years of pain, loneliness, and silence. When he crossed the streets of his city, no one knew exactly how to react. For some, he was still the guy with crime. For others, a victim of the cruelest system that exists, injustice. But for André, none of that mattered. What hurt most wasn't the time he spent behind bars. What hurt most was what time took away. His son, that little boy he left crying on the doorstep, was now a distant teenager, raised without his father's presence, carrying doubts, traumas, and invisible wounds. His wife, who once believed his every word, now carried in her eyes the pain of a decade, lived without answers, without hugs, without a future. The home he dreamed of finding again no longer existed in the same way, because André's home has always been made up of people, and people change. When forced to survive alone, André's case made headlines, shocked the country, but no report, no compensation, no official apology would be able to give back what he lost. Your crime? Being born with the wrong face. Having unknowingly shared the same DNA with a stranger who lived in the shadows and used his life as a shield. André was condemned before he even opened his mouth, even before defending yourself, because for the system, sometimes appearance is worth more than truth. And now, free, what André was left with were not answers, but scars. Invisible marks that no mirror shows, but that the soul carries forever. And perhaps the most painful part of this whole story is knowing that he wasn't the first. And tragically, it may not be the last. If this story touched you, revolted you, or made you reflect for a moment on how fragile the line between truth and condemnation can be, then don't let this message get lost. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because here every story is a cry against silence. And in the next episode, you'll discover something even more disturbing, a truth no one imagined could be real.